Hey, everybody, welcome back to the AI in Healthcare podcast. Very excited to introduce our guest here today. Rand, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Randy Dojutrek. I've been in healthcare for nearly 20 years now. Prior to that, I've been everything from a computer programmer to a high school English teacher. So I like to think I bring a little bit of both academia as well as corporate America into any discussion about technology, particularly AI.
Absolutely. Very excited to pick your brain about AI, healthcare, and also academia, your involvement in university as well. So for those who don't know, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Hey, everybody, I'm Jeremy from HiPass, making AI a reality in healthcare. Teams like Kaiser Permanente, Molina Healthcare, and Centaur love HiPass because they reduce claims processing by 30%, reduce fraudulent claims by 50%, save $10 million annually on framed fraud losses, secured exchange of health data using FHIR, automated billing operations, and automate compliance with Medicare, Medicaid. So all in one platform. So all in HiPass's AI products. So Rand, would you tell us a little bit more about your experience in healthcare and technology? Typically, what is sort of your areas of ownership, the responsibilities, roles, and what sort of genre of projects, yeah, do you lead?
Uh, Sure. My introduction into healthcare was several years ago when I actually directed the development of a application that nurse call centers use to help patients with chronic conditions, asthma, diabetes, COPD, CAD. And that was my first introduction to healthcare, which was really fascinating because it really brought out the human side to it. Using claims data to be able to find people who possibly had these conditions, reach out to them, offer them a dedicated nurse to talk to them and help them manage their conditions. From there, we branched out into wellness. So we went from things like diabetes and COPD to weight management, smoking cessation, those types of programs that affected, less of an impact, but a wider audience. And then shifted a little bit and then went out into the world of medical claims, which, as you can tell, especially with an aging population, is a booming industry. Some of the organizations I've worked for processed up to over 1 million of claims a day, fully automated, and looking forward to AI having a profound impact on that. And currently, I dabble in a few things. In my current role, I maintain digital mobile apps. We look at enterprise health management as well as the more technical grassroots of API management and also big data.
Very cool. I'd love to dive into these apps and sort of how
Mhm.
it interacts with clients or client data or the internal organization. But I did want to touch on something you mentioned earlier, which struck me. You mentioned bringing the human back into the technology, the data, in the healthcare system. What did you mean by that? Working in technology in healthcare, does it sometimes feel like you lose sight of sort of the human element of it? Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think it's at multiple levels. So it was really interesting when I first started in disease management. I just had my first son born, and I read an account of a person who was throwing a ball playing catch with their son who happened to be a hemophiliac. Ball hits him in the nose and has an uncontrollable bleed, and that really impacted me personally. You can talk a lot about chronic conditions. You can talk about data and big data and algorithms and stratification. But at the end of the day, it's a person who wants to play catch with their son. And that is played out in multiple different ways, whether it's someone who wants to be athletic but can't because of a knee injury, or someone who loves to dine out but has to change their entire life because they're diagnosed with diabetes. So from a member and participant side, that really affected me. But then you know what? The other thing too is we fall so much in love with technology, we forget that technologists are also human beings. And
Yeah.
and so now that we have the onset of AI in almost everything we do, really trying to keep an eye on the human aspect of that. Uh,
Mhm.
one of the people I talked to about AI is that just because you have a faster car doesn't make you a better driver. And so I think we have to measure both the excitement of a newer technology that offers some great benefits versus the the conservative nature, because obviously data is at risk and we don't want to give up privacy. And behind all of these things, I always joke and say that I don't care if anyone sees my medical records, but really kind of do. And so
Yeah,
trying
yeah.
to balance human elements, both from a technologist side as well as the members.
I'm curious about sort of what your approach or philosophy here is, just lingering on this topic for a little longer. Is there a process you use to keep the human or the end user, that example, right? Just a father who wants to play catch with their son. What's your process for bringing that into technology implementation, development, design? And why? Why is that important? What's the impact of that, the end result, right? On the product, on the user experience?
When I first got into IT, it was all about delivery and all about delivery is quick,
Yeah.
error-free, awesome. Our weekends go well, it's in, no errors, we're good. But it's very sterile. Okay, of course, as developers or test engineers or whatever role you play in the development lifecycle, we have to remember that what we're doing it for. We have to have a purpose, a higher purpose. Now, healthcare takes on a chin a lot, and sometimes deservedly so. But when you think about it, we do our jobs right as technologists. It impacts positively, perhaps some of the worst times a person could be going through. Okay, I don't know about you, but I've had, being born in an older family, I've seen kind of a whole gamut of different healthcare procedures and processes. And there's enough to worry about without worrying that I can't get my referral or somehow my claim's not paid or I owe a bill that's not being taken care of. So what I try to instill in my technologists and even myself is the fact that let's learn what not only the business drivers are, because that seems very corporate and very sterile. Let's think about the end user. Okay, the end user is coming to us for help in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes it might be innocuous. Okay, is it okay if I have an extra piece of cake at Thanksgiving if I'm a diabetic? Sometimes it's serious. It's like I don't have anything in my bank account and I'm waiting on a referral, I'm waiting on a reimbursement. So by not only being as good technically as you can be, but also understanding the human condition behind it, I think it makes technologists even more capable, even more careful, and even more compassionate.
Absolutely. I really, really appreciate your thought process here and approach to looking at building technology for the end user, for people. It makes a real impact. It's people's lives, right? What we're talking about. Randy, I'd love to ask you, switching gears, as much as you could talk about, right? Oh, and we can talk about the strategy, but um, you mentioned you're doing a lot in claims, and I imagine there's a lot of automation happening, optimization of operations, right? Manual tasks and things like that. I'd love to understand what's your approach now to say something like claims or any sort of area that you might be optimizing using technology. Are you using AI? Are you using data analytics? Are you building teams who very efficiently manually process all these tasks? Yeah, I'd love to understand how you're pushing that.
So the bottom line is humans are wonderful creatures, but they are awfully slow. So the task and the goal we always have in automation is to make sure that it gets through us as quickly as possible. Throughput is a big thing, and especially in medical claims,
Oh yeah.
especially in a lot of these communications, you don't want to wait days. You can't wait days in some cases. So when we look at automation, we really think what is someone doing manually now that can be seamlessly replaced by automation? AI is only going to accelerate that change. Of course, obviously, we have to be very, very careful with it. From a technology standpoint, as a technologist, a former technologist, and currently a leader of technologists, what is the almost mundane aspect of technology?
Yeah.
So if we have to replicate the same change across multiple programs, there's got to be a quicker way to do it. This is some of the early feedback we found from AI. It does allow us to rapidly make change across things that used to take a lot of man hours, person hours to get done. And now it's being done in a blink.
Are we able are there any examples or even sort of the area, what category within healthcare, right, as a whole, the healthcare system?
In the healthcare system, so we have a lot of scripts that obviously run in the background, especially when you talk about APIs, which are shared across multiple applications. When you have to replicate one change for whatever reason, whether it's a regulation, whether it's a response to a new security vulnerability, whatever it is, it used to be painstakingly slow in terms of trying to identify everything and tracking and going through spreadsheets, et cetera.
Oh,
With
yeah.
AI now, you're able to say, look for a specific pattern and then get an identified pattern to you, and then also replicate the change across all of the scripts. It
Wow.
allows us to react much quicker, whether it's a vulnerability, much quicker, whether it's a change in an endpoint or process. This allows us not to spend so much time on the more what I would call, vital but mundane, and actually work on the more interesting and actually more value differentiation for both the member and by association, our company.
And for our audience, that's an amazing point. For our audience, what is the impact to the user when, an API change or a security vulnerability update, when that does take a lot of manual hours to do versus, okay, we could just do it in a day, right? Um, yeah, what's the benefit of that?
Well, I can assure you that the folks, the what we call bad actors, are always looking for vulnerabilities. They have shops and shops of people just hammering away at it. And so when a vulnerability is identified, whether it's the white hat hacker or maybe an industry-wide, um, you know, uh, finding, we
Yeah.
can actually react very, very quickly. So one step ahead of them at all times. Knock on wood, we have yet to experience a major breach, but you see it all the time in the news.
Yep.
People who are just a little slower to react to something, whether it's they don't have the bandwidth to do it, or whether they don't have the tools to do it as quickly as they can. I think
Wow.
AI is really going to have a profound impact in not only our ability to get rid of some of these more mundane things through automation, but also to be able to react much quicker. And
Mm.
I think the action is really the value, to be able to get ahead of bad actors or to replicate something out there quickly. Think about, just even COVID, the onset of COVID, from any way you want to look at it, from providers to your claims to all of these services. This is multiple years past now. It seems forever. But just think of if AI was even more prevalent, how much quicker we could have reacted in some of those ways. And as much as we'd like to say there's not going to be another COVID, you never know.
Oh,
If you're following the World Health Organization, they're already talking about mpox, coming maybe not our way, but certainly starting to be prevalent in other parts of the world.
absolutely. Um, along those lines, I'd love to understand, we talked about sort of short term, the immediate impact and use cases, applications of AI, looking at a lot of data and just very quickly understanding it and maybe even applying fixes and updates like you mentioned, and also in the security scenario. But long term, I'm curious, as a technologist, as somebody who's strategizing and looking at what's out there constantly and looking at how you could apply it into the healthcare space. Long term, what is your long term vision for AI? How could it transform the mundane tasks or maybe even the not so mundane tasks. Curious to hear what your vision is. And also two-part question, love to understand because you alluded to it twice, privacy, security, but I can ask that question later. But yeah, the vision first, yeah.
I think the AI is going to have a very, very profound impact on more than just how we do things, but what we do. So, as I mentioned before, I used to be a high school English teacher before I got into technology, and this is like every high school English teacher's revenge. Because if you know anything about AI, it's going to be only as effective as the question you answer. Prompt engineering, mark that down. That's going to be a huge field. And really, when you think about it, while it is definitely a way of thinking, it's where the communication skills, the writing ability, the ability to structure your thoughts and communicate with intention is going to be more important than ever. And that is something, to be honest with you, technologists at times have had problems with. We all go through college and Comp 101. I'm not going to pay attention to that. I rather look at my development classes, all of these other things. Well, now really what we're looking at is a whole change in the way we might even view language, because there are at least 11 different thought methodologies behind prompt engineering to ask the right question in a structured and correct manner to get the best response. And
Mhm.
that's not only a way of thinking, it's also a way of communicating. And
All questions. Yeah.
it's going to have huge impacts on not only the industry, but I think how colleges prepare students for corporate America, so to speak. Uh, Perfect cases right now, you have a lot of colleges squirming because people can use ChatGPT, AI to write papers, et cetera. That's the tip of the iceberg. Now, I think forward-thinking universities, and I happen to be working with one now, or about to begin working with one. They're not going to look to avoid AI. They're going to look to incorporate it. And what is the curriculum? How does the curriculum have to change to best navigate it in the most effective manner? And I think you're going to see a lot of opportunities for training, retraining, communication theory now that formerly was college English professor journal material into the mainstream, where we're going to have to figure out exactly how to communicate intentionally and with a desired impact.
Um, before I'd love to move on to to academia, but real quick, um, how do you balance and tackle bringing in new technology like AI that works with a lot of data and data, in healthcare especially, right? Privacy and balance that with privacy, security, and you mentioned the vulnerabilities and things like that. And you also mentioned one way to use AI to tackle security, but how do you see that and how do you balance AI and privacy and security?
Well, as I said before, just having a faster car doesn't make you a better driver. So I think a lot of corporations right now are, if not struggling, they're certainly conservative in their approach. You don't want, an oops has profound implications. Especially when you're looking at privacy data. I can't go by 2 weeks without someone telling me, oh, you've been in a breach and here's your free credit service. Well, AI is going to just grab a hold of every available data you have unless you're very intentional on how you structure your AI and structure your environment to only have access to the data that it needs, okay, and not the just big sponge. Like right now, we go on ChatGPT and we're all fascinated because it's grabbing data from everywhere. That's great in the internet, not so great when you're talking about corporations. And so I think what's going to happen in the industry, and it's already happening, is you're going to see a lot of new roles being created
Mm.
just to make sure that machine learning, AI, uh, all of these tools now are properly structured, properly segmented, and properly protected. We all get very excited about it. But one of the worst things we can do is just miss something. So as we start thinking intentionally, much like with prompt engineering or asking the right questions, we also have to understand the right outcomes. Okay. And I'm kind of a work backward guy. I like to figure out what the outcomes we want are, and then work backwards to how do we ensure we get the right outcome. And that plays perfectly into a field like prompt engineering, or you look at AI engineers, machine learning engineers. All of these roles are really going to explode in the industry over the next few years.
Absolutely. I want to switch gears again and tap into your wealth of experience in academia. So, just real quick comment. I have a engineering background, went to an engineering school, and worked in engineering. I think engineers there's a stereotype that engineers are, we just want to like solve problems, solve puzzles, and not really talk to people or communicate. I
Right.
noticed on your profile, being a coach, being a mentor, being a communicator. And as you mentioned, really, as you see engineering sort of shifting into this sort of English, teacher's revenge and this communication skill, I'd love to understand, your experience as a teacher, and also I understand that you are also involved in university today, maybe even in doing AI stuff today. Could you tell us a little bit more about your involvement in academia?
It's just beginning to be honest with you. My daughter plays basketball for a university, and they changed their university presidents. Really inspiring person who's coming in, who's looking to make that transition from academia to corporate America, because colleges tend to graduate folks with kind of here's what we think you need for corporate America. And then I get them, and I do a lot with emerging talent, and a lot with interns and what we call associates here, bringing them in. They miss the nuance. And so what I really excited about the university is the fact that looking at curriculum and how can we point what we're doing in college to a skill that they will use in corporate America. Case in point, if you're looking at even something like a history class. If you have to go up and present in front of a history class, presentation's pretty large in America, in corporate America. And folks who can do presentations seamlessly, that's a pretty valuable value add that people bring to the table. So if you look at, for example, engineering schools or technology schools. Now, admittedly, it's been decades since I earned my engineering degree, but back in the day, it was much more about the technology. And I think there's going to be a shift, if it hasn't already started to happen, to not only the technology, but the effect of technology and the presentation of technology and the explanation of technology. So the more that universities can start instilling that, I think the better outcome we'll have when they come into corporate America, as it were, and start to be able to navigate users who may need translation, business analysts who are trying to translate, down to executives who got to have your elevator speech. If you run into one, you have to be able to quickly reply. And then, of course, that feeds into prompt engineering. So communication, consulting, communication coaching, communication in academia is really going to have to change over the next few years.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate your approach to bridging the gap between real world application and day-to-day work and what we learn preparing students for the real world. My information's outdated, but I went to school maybe over a decade ago, and all I remember is, yes, I learned how to learn in university, but I never learned anything relevant to real world work. Everything I did learn that was relevant was something I did on my own, extracurricular, a club, other peer students and things like that. So, um, anytime I see somebody tackling the system, changing the system, I absolutely appreciate it. I just, wish I had something like that when I was growing up. I wanted to switch gears one last time and ask you, uh, I'm curious, how did you get into healthcare? And you mentioned something earlier about your family.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, where sort of do you draw inspiration and yeah, how did you get into it and what's your passion for it to stay in it today?
I guess it really started. I was born into like what I would call a really old family. I'm just about the last remaining. My older brother and I are the last two, and so I was exposed to like the healthcare system as a very young child. My brother was in Vietnam, so we had to navigate the VA. My dad had some poor health, much of it his own making, but multiple strokes, diabetes, all of these comorbidities. And what fascinated me about it was the fact that this was absolutely archaic back in the day, decades ago. And I always imagined there had to be a better way. And going through, I can remember hospitals where you could have one visitor at a time, only through these very prescribed business visitation hours. Now we know, of course, that getting visitors when you can, not infectious, anything like that, getting visitors actually helps. It's more holistic. These things, it's as much mental as it is physical. So
Hmm.
when I had an opportunity to move from a very gratifying but mundane career in title insurance to be able to jump to healthcare, it just opened up a whole lot of fascinating things to me. And so it wasn't only the technology that drove me, but it was also the nurses. I worked with a great many nurses and some doctors. And by the way, nurses are the unsung heroes in America, believe me. They have a sensibility about them that's incredible. And so the more I worked with nurses, the more I got to see the human element, the more I got to see a little bit of the clinical element. And then, as I had children, they would get sick, sometimes pretty innocuously, sometimes severely. And so that just kind of drove me more and more to actually work for a healthcare company, although my wife would argue I work for an insurance company. But work in the area of healthcare where we actually try to make things just a little bit easier.
Randy, thank you so much for speaking with us today and sharing your knowledge and your experience and wisdom with us. The last question here is who from our community of healthcare leaders should reach out to you, and what's the best way to reach you?
LinkedIn. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. Dojutrek is a very uncommon name, more common since I got married, as I started bringing a few into the world. But reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can find out a little bit more about who I am, what I do, and excited to talk to anyone, especially folks who are just getting into technology. We do a lot with emerging technologists and interns, and even during the pandemic, I worked for Driving Forward, which is a wonderful organization, not-for-profit, that offers virtual internships to first-generation college students. Get to me on LinkedIn. I can also point you to Driving Forward. I'd love to have a discussion with anyone, especially about technical communications, which is my passion.
Very, very cool. And links will be in the description. Thank you so much, Randy. And folks, thanks for listening to another episode. We'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.